it's the little things that just sort of add up.
Simple things. And, as always, communication around all this stuff, that's the key. So we talked about, the
Welcome to Live
order
Greater
and
View,
spectrum.
a financial planning podcast produced by VLP Financial Advisors that discusses life, money, and perspective. We help clients live their best life at every stage through our VLP Live Greater partnership process. Thank you for tuning in.
All right, we're back with another episode of the Live Greater View. I'm Chris Malone, certified financial planner and partner.
I'm Dan Lash, also a certified financial planner and partner here of 28 years at VLP.
There we go. 28 years, coming up on 10.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, we have a good conversation for us today. Something that we thought that we'd be able to add a lot of context to, something that's coming up more and more through our client meetings. That is the topic of the sandwich generation.
Yep. Got kids, and I got youngish kids, and I also have aging parents, and I'm sort of in between.
Yeah. How do you figure all that out? A lot of competing priorities. You add, that stuff, family, emotion, finances, a lot to unpack there. When we think about just how prevalent this issue is, Pew published a research study in 2021. How many Americans do you think kind of roll up into this category?
Well, I saw those studies, so
there you go.
I kind of know. It's about around 25%. It's
pretty wild.
Give or take.
Yeah, 25%. So 1 in 4, people that you come across is dealing with this. So very, very interesting. And there's different dynamics to it. There's obviously the side of caring for parents, caring for kids, caring for yourself. So we'll dive into that. So with that being said, why don't we start by just setting the table, actually defining it more formally, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, the term sandwich generation came when the baby boomers started having kids in the late 70s, early 80s, into the early 90s, and their parents' generation was one of the first generations that lived significantly longer than maybe people had expected, because prior generations only lived into their mid-60s or so.
Right.
And so they were the first real generation of, hey, I have teenagers and I have much older aging parents, and how do I deal with that? And now every generation after that are going to be sandwiched, unless people decide to just not live long, or not have kids. Yep. And there's obviously people who decide not to have children, which is fine. So right now, I'm Gen X, born from 68 to 80, depending on who you look at. I'm smack in the middle of having older parents and younger. My kids are young adults, but I still have friends who have kids who are in their teens. You're starting to see the millennial generation, your generation, is having kids, and you're not so fully into it yet because your kids are really young and your parents aren't quite that old where they're needing more assistance with helping with their finances or anything else. But it's coming.
Yep. And even from a millennial's perspective, just seeing parents and older family dealing with this, the boomer generation, it's something that's like you just said, hey, this isn't going anywhere. It's something that's, coming up more and more, amongst my peers. So as far as the particulars for why this is happening, I think there's, a couple of different wrinkles to point out here. So obviously the first consideration, people are living longer. So we know there's, all these sorts of advances in AI and some of the things that get headlines. Obviously that trickles down into healthcare, and that, has a lot of momentum. The second one, particularly within my demographic, people are delaying having kids. There's obviously, a lot of different competing priorities with career. Interest rates are very high. It's very hard to make it all happen. And obviously when you have kids later and later in life, you sort of open yourself up to being in this, sandwich and having this sort of scenario.
Yeah, and healthcare has helped with that in the sense that, when my mom was in her 30s when she had me, and she's still alive. She'll be 85 this year. And back then they were like, oh, if you're 30 something years old, you're in your mid 30s, you're old for having kids.
Yeah.
Right. And now, healthcare has gotten better, and to be 34, 35 years old, that's not considered old for having children. And so in previous generations, they were having kids much younger. So it's a combination of things. One, from a healthcare perspective, it's okay to have kids. You're not going to have any healthcare risks by doing it typically.
Right.
And people are more focused on their careers, and can be, because they go, hey, I don't have to have kids at 25. 35 is not going to be detrimental to me or the baby. And so that a combination of those things has sort of led to people saying, hey, we're going to have kids slightly later in life. But that means they may have really little kids when they have much older parents, and that gets to be a struggle.
Right. I'm on both ends of the spectrum. And then there's that third, wrinkle there too is, obviously, we have situations where clients have kids go to school, they go out, they, even get jobs, and they come out of and enter the workforce, and they're saying, wow, rent is between $2,000 and $3,000 a month. I know where mortgage rates are. I know housing affordability is really tough. Why don't I just go live at home for a handful of years, save, and then go from there? And then you have a situation where you have parents.
Are you talking about me?
There you go. So yeah, I know a guy in that situation. So then you have, let's unpack that and your thoughts around that.
Yeah. Well, hopefully the kid has a job, right? And
That helps.
And they're doing the live at home with mom and dad to save money so that they can afford to move out, and not be living paycheck to paycheck just because they have so much rent.
Yeah.
I think it's a little different than if the kid has no job. Your young adult child has no job and no prospects for a job and is just hanging out at home. Hopefully that's not the case. But yeah, it's a little easier at that point just because those kids are adults. They know how to dress themselves and do all these things. And so they're not taking up as much of your time as when they're, really little kids. And so you can focus that time a little bit more on the parents, but also you have to read the, your adult parents of where are they? Does it look like they're in need of assistance? Are they asking for it? Are they not asking for it?
Yeah.
Are they open to it? Are they not open to having conversations? Because, money is the last taboo.
Yeah.
When I was little, I asked my dad, hey, how much do you make? And the first answer was, what do you need to know that for? And you're like, well, I probably couldn't count to maybe at that age to a number he was going to say, but he's probably not going to say a number that I've never heard of before.
Right.
It's not magic.
Right.
So part of it is getting people open to have these conversations. And that's sort of where that sticking point with sandwich generations is that they aren't necessarily having these conversations yet with their own children because they're not old enough to understand it. And they never really had that same conversation. Their parents didn't have it with them. So now they're thinking about going to their parents and having these conversations. And it can be a challenge, let's say.
And I think there's value to us unpacking like both of those angles. So let's talk about, how do you approach those conversations and things to consider around your parents' financial, situation. I know that you've been quoted in books and articles, and there's a whole art to that. So why don't we, unpack some ideas and thoughts around how to really cross that bridge?
Yeah, well, in the first type of relationship, it's a good open relationship with your parents, and they're willing to have conversations with you about this is what's going on. Hey, here's a copy of our will if something happens to us, because they've probably named each other, mom and dad, if they're married, have named each other as their executors. But then they go, well, what if who's the backup?
Right.
And it's usually one of their kids. Right. And typically one of the kids who lives relatively close to them. So if you have an open relationship, they're happy to have these conversations. And it's not like pulling teeth to get information about them. Like, hey, if something happens to you, how do your bills get paid? Like, not that you pass away, but you're not healthy and you're in the hospital or you're in a nursing facility. What happens? Who's your power of attorney? And if they're all open to that, makes it really, really simple. It's the people who pull back and go, don't worry about it.
Yeah.
You go, that's not going to actually help the situation when it arrives.
Yeah.
Because we didn't have any conversation whatsoever. And now I have to randomly rummage through your things in your house and try to find these documents that are necessary and try to figure stuff out because you didn't want to have the conversation because you didn't want to be an adult about it.
Yeah.
Or they're just really uncomfortable because their parents never had that conversation. It just goes generationally.
And it's a ticking time bomb, and it just leaves so much work, for everybody else. So, as you said, the sooner that you can have those conversations, the better. So I think table stakes for those conversations are, obviously, what are your thoughts on this? What's your estate planning look like? Getting more comfortable, and then dive into the dollars and cents to a certain level. Obviously, that's going to be part of the bigger equation as far as assets, debt, how things are paid, all of that. The more information, the better. Why don't you talk a little bit about the book that you're quoted in? I think that would be a great resource to talk about here.
Sure. Yeah. Here, I'll reach down. Let me grab it. It's called Let's see. I'll put it up there. Mom and Dad, we need to talk. How to have essential conversations with their parents about their finances. So this book came out about 5 years ago. I just happen to know the author, who's Cameron Huddleston, who's great. And she said, hey, we've had conversations about other financial topics because she's a writer. And she asked if I would provide some quotes or just some insights of what I've seen as a professional doing this, working with people. And I got a lot out of the book in thinking about ways to talk to parents. Usually when that situation is, we don't want to talk, right? For those people who are open, it's probably pretty easy. So one of my suggestions was parents always want to help their children in general, right? We want our kids to be happy. We want to help them. And so, if the parent is closed off, a good idea for their adult children is to say, hey, look, I'm getting ready to do my own estate documents. What did you do?
Right.
And try to get them, and would you provide me with any advice around things to consider when you did that? Mm-hmm. And parents want to give their children advice. They want to help them. We never stop being parents. What we're parenting about changes over time, right?
Yeah.
But we don't stop. And so sometimes it's asking them questions if they can help you so you can learn about what they've done.
That's awesome. Yeah, it gets them to open up and just frames it in the right light.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a challenge. There's lots of techniques that she talks about in the book, and it's something that sometimes people think it's going to be one conversation. And maybe it's not. You're not seeing most people are not seeing their parents every day. They may not necessarily be texting or calling them every day. So it might be a slow process to, one, talk about the estate documents, two, hey, well, we bank here and the online banking is difficult. Do you guys do a lot of online banking as well? Yes, no.
Yeah.
You just sort of start parceling together tidbits of things. And maybe you can move the conversation to say, well, can you elaborate on that? Or oh, I hadn't thought about that. What did you do here? What did you do with this particular topic?
And the next time you bring it up, it's just more natural. It's not as awkward, hopefully, just because it's just more of a continuation than breaking the ice.
Yeah, and it just depends on how guarded the parents are around money.
Right. And the dollars and cents, obviously that's different from situation to situation, and the estate documents, that's, a whole separate, piece of the conversation. Let's talk about healthcare and how you've seen that play out over the years in different client situations, and how, that sort of conversation is framed as far as with parents. Hey, what are we thinking for your care? What does that look like? What are your thoughts on, one, having that conversation and some commonalities you've seen there?
Well, it's a challenge because we tend not to look at ourselves as needing assistance, right? Especially as we get older, and we want to maintain our independence. We want to be the adults that we've become and not relying on other people to help us out to even get in and out of a chair. I mean, you see it with older people. We go, hey, can I help you out? And they're like, no, I can do this myself.
It's a pride thing.
Yeah.
Sure.
And it's something they've done all their life. They go, I can get in and out of a chair. Come on. So, part of it is just small conversations around things. For instance, hey, if something were to happen to you and you needed ongoing assistance, would you want it in your house? And if it's not feasible to do it in the house, is there a facility in the area you've ever looked at? And see where that conversation goes. I mean, the number one reason why people need long-term care in this country is called a broken hip. So people go, oh, well, that won't happen to me. You go, well, that's why they call it an accident.
Yeah, everybody says that.
They're called accidents for a reason. You can't predict them.
Right.
So you go, okay, you broke your hip. You can't really be at home because somebody has to help you in and out of bed, in and out of a chair, in and out of the shower. You may not be able to stand long enough to be able to cook. So where is that going to occur? And maybe you get better from the broken hip and you can move back home and do all those things again. But in the short term, where is that and where would you want it to be? So it's not like you're always just sort of worrying about the worst case scenario, but I don't know if aging is the worst case scenario. I mean, you don't want to worry about an accident, but we put on a seatbelt when we get in the car so that we don't get injured if we are in an accident. So you go, hey, look, if this accident occurs, where would you want to be?
It's for a reason. Yep. And I've found too, in these situations, a lot of times their peers, have gone
exactly
either to, some sort of facility or they have some sort of arrangement. And by asking like, hey, how is so-and-so, like, how are they doing? How's their family doing?
Right.
And they'll have some sort of offhand experience of, hey, that looks like something I would consider, or, I wouldn't do that. It wouldn't fit, my mold or my personality.
Right.
And that's just a very sort of casual way to open, them up. So that's worked well of, hey, how about, your friend and what's their experience like? So, the other piece too is who is, involved in these conversations is very important. Every family is different, siblings are different, relationships are different.
Oh, yeah.
Like a lot of things as it relates to some of these more, sensitive topics. I don't think there's a right or a wrong way necessarily to go about a lot of these situations just because every family is so unique. Everybody's obviously, doing their best to take care of aging parents. What are some commonalities that you've seen where you say, hey, that's worked successful with some of the clients that you've worked with?
It used to be the oldest adult son was the one that I would see parents and families would, because it was the traditional, hey, the male is supposed to take care of the family. I'm not seeing that as much anymore.
Gotcha.
I'm typically seeing logistics being the issue. Mm-hmm. Hey, I live in Virginia and I have 3 kids, one in California, one in Texas, and one in Virginia. You go, look, the kid in California might be able to help, but not to the degree that the person who logistically is closer can do. Yep. But it also creates issues it could create issues with the siblings in that there's the one sibling who's having to do the vast majority of the work, and the other siblings are going, hey, let me give you these suggestions. And they get a little resentful going, well, if you want to suggest all this stuff, why don't you fly out here and help out? So there's a lot, there's all these dynamics that go into it. And you'll have children who are more responsible, or at least you'll think as the parent are the more responsible child and say, well, I'd rather that child be able to, make these decisions. One of the things I used to see more often, not as much today, is people would name their kids equally when it came to their health care, mm-hmm. their power of attorney, and maybe even their will. They're like, oh, I don't want to choose between my kids. And you're like, look, now you have 2 or 3 or 4 people trying to make decisions collectively. It can create a problem. So it's really easier if you go, I'm going to name somebody. If that person doesn't want to do it, then name the next contingent person down the line. But it's certainly important to, as best you can, have a group conversation with the kids. If you're the older parents of, these are the things that we've discussed. This is what we want to happen. It may not necessarily always happen in this way. Share little things like passwords. Mm-hmm. I mean, nobody writes checks to pay their bills anymore.
Yep.
So where are all those stored? And how do we gain access to it so I can go in and pay your bills? It's the little things that just sort of add up.
Simple things. And, there's always communication around all this stuff. That's
yep.
the key. So we talked about, the older end of the spectrum. Let's spend a couple of minutes talking about the younger end of the spectrum. Costs for kids and some of the considerations around that. When you're somebody who's, trying to make it all happen, you're in your peak earnings years and you're dealing with an aging parent, how do you handle that dynamic of, hey, I'm trying to care for kids, plan for them, trying to save for my retirement, save for their college, stuff like that. Let's spend a couple of minutes on considerations around that.
Yeah. So part of that is you or I gauging, hey, well, how are my parents feeling? Are they starting to be forgetful? Are they, if you've driven in a car with them, you go, whoa, what? Yeah. I don't know if I want to drive with them. Where are they, mentally and physically? If they're pretty good, they're only 65, 70, and you go, hey, they're good. But there will be warning signs of things to consider. And you're going about dealing with your own kids. You go, look, I got a plan for my kids' education. If I die prematurely, making enough life insurance. If my wife and I die, so that we have our own estate documents, we need to have all our stuff in place. Let's get our stuff in place. You'd rather get all your things in place and then worry about mom and dad down the road. And maybe that helps with that conversation. As I said earlier, you go, hey, mom and dad, we're doing all these things to prepare for our kids. And what are some of the things you did? Do you work with anybody? Do you have an advisor? Do you have a CPA, somebody that you trust that you work with, and see if they'll gauge you in that? But I've had conversations with my parents, and they now live in their third retirement home. They retired 25 years ago and had a big house, and then downsized to an over 55 community, and now they're in a retirement community with a 2-bedroom apartment. Mm-hmm. And while they don't live really far away, because I work and I have my own kids, I said, look, if something were to happen to you and you needed to be in a facility, I'm probably going to put you in a facility that I think is really good, but I don't know if you necessarily like it, depending on how much we can engage with your healthcare, mm-hmm. right? Are they really out of it, or what's going on? I don't know. I said, well, you live there. Why don't you spend the time? You're retired. You got nothing but time. Every day is Saturday. Mm-hmm. So why don't you spend some time going and look at various facilities that you think you might want to look at? And what came out of it was funny was they said, 2 things. They're most worried about the food, mm-hmm. which I go, I get it. If you're going to pay somebody to, you're paying $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 a month, you want them to be eating good food. And then the other thing was this, and the really strangest thing that I think my mom said to me was, it's really weird thinking that we're going to be moving to the last place we're ever going to live.
It's tough.
I wasn't expecting to hear that.
There's a finality to it.
Yeah. And while we all know we're not going to be on this planet forever, it's hard to think about our own mortality. And that sort of makes it hit home. You're like, yeah, this is it. Yep. You ain't going anywhere. I mean, yep. it's here, or the hospital, or the grave, or however it is. And it can be emotional and challenging at the same time, because they're going from a house with all their life stuff, all their experiences, all their memories, and being told, you got to get rid of 2/3 of this stuff because you can't fit it wherever you're going. And your kids don't want any of this stuff because they've accumulated their own stuff. Yeah. And now you got to go into something that you're just completely unfamiliar with. And so that can be a challenge.
Yeah, and I've seen, obviously there's challenges there. I also have seen situations where it brings the family closer together because there is that finality of it, and then the person that's moving into the facility almost says, hey, you know what, I'm doing this for my kids, for my grandkids, and it just brings them, closer together. It's not easy by any means, but it's, hey, I'm doing this for you and doing this for our family. Yep. And that's just a bit different of a lens, to it also. So shifting gears, we're talking about, parents and kids and, those sorts of, ends of the spectrum. And then at the middle, you have, the person that's actually in the sandwich generation trying to make it happen, stay, on track at work, save for themselves. A very common question that we get is, how am I going to help take care of my parents, do this stuff, save for my kids' college? If the younger kid moves in, help provide for them oftentimes, and save for myself. Is there a right or a wrong way to go about that? Let's unpack, some different thoughts around those competing priorities for someone that's trying to save for retirement and, do all these other things.
Well, most people don't have the means where they can just spend as much money as they want on whoever they want, and they can. It's a non-issue, right? There's always some limiting monetary factor involved. But when it comes to your parents, you go, look, you can't forego your future by providing your parents with the things they need. Similar to what we say with, people whose kids are getting ready to go into college, and they go, hey, should I take out a loan for my kid's college or take money out of my retirement account for college? I go, look, your kid can get a loan for college. You can't get a loan for the future. Right. There's no loan to retire. Right. And, so if your parents weren't fiscally responsible and they don't have that much money, you have to start looking at your own finances and go, okay, well, how much of my money can I utilize for them, but still allow myself to save for my future and pay my current bills and those things? It might be zero. You go, look, mom and dad, I can give you like $100 a month. I can't give you much, and you're going to run out of money. Fortunately, we have somewhat of a safety net with Medicaid. Usually people have a house, mom and dad do, if they have no other assets. And so maybe they can do a reverse mortgage or sell the house, get the proceeds from it, and that will be their way to pay for care.
Yeah.
But you can't, time is fleeting. It goes by quickly. And you go, well, me giving mom and dad $50,000 to help out here, you go, okay, well, how long can you sustain this for? And will that affect it? And if you could retire at 65, but giving money to mom and dad when you're in your 40s means you got to work into your 70s, are you willing to do that? And people don't tend to look at, hey, the money I spent now, how is it going to affect what I can do in the future? And hence why the mom and dad might be in the situation that they're in, because they didn't plan correctly. But, everything, if anybody's listened to this podcast before, everything comes down to planning, right? We tend not to be successful if we're not going to plan.
Yep. Yeah, you beat me to it. I think within our Money Guide Pro software, we're able to run all sorts of scenarios where, retirement scenarios and, all of these different things that are more intuitive. This is something that we're running more and more of, hey, how much can I actually help? How far can I move that needle before I'm really putting myself in jeopardy? And, again, it all comes back to the planning, because it's really hard to conceptualize for somebody that's, let's say you're in your early 50s and you're thinking, hey, I'm going to work for another 15 years, and it seems that far out. And then you show, hey, this is how those dollars and cents would compound and what that actually mean for you and in often cases your spouse. And it puts a completely different spin, on everything. So the planning, is so important.
Yeah. I mean, you have to prioritize yourself. It sounds selfish, but there's nobody else doing it. Right. And so you go, oh, I got to prioritize myself over my kids. Financially, yeah, potentially. There's things you can do to make sure that if you're not around, that they're taken care of with life insurance and things like that. But, certainly save for college. If you want your kid to go to college and you want to help pay for it, try to save for it. But I wouldn't forego saving my own retirement in order to do that.
Yeah.
Right? Because you're either not going to be able to work forever or not want to, or some company's not going to want you to. Something's going to happen. So you got to prioritize yourselves and then expand from there of, okay, how can I help these other people, in this case, kids and parents, if they need it. But going back to the conversation around, talk to your parents about their finances, that sort of gives you an idea of, okay, do they have anything to take care of themselves with? Will I actually need to help them with their finances? They might be in a really good shape. They've met with a financial advisor. They've met with Chris Ballone, who's the best financial advisor ever. And, Chris worked with them and said, hey, you're good. We've figured out long-term care and, towards the end of your life of $150,000 a year in today's dollars, and you're fine. You can do all those things. And, then the parents can go back to the kid and go, yeah, it's different when they say you don't need to worry about it because I've actually worked on planning it, as opposed to, don't worry about it. Right? Yeah. I've done nothing about it, but don't worry about
It's
it.
your worst nightmare when, don't worry about it. Yeah. And all you do is worry about it.
Well, then you go, well, why shouldn't I not worry about it?
Yeah.
Because you've spent time and effort to worry about it yourself, which you should be doing. Oh, no, we just say that just so you won't worry. Well, that's not making it go away. Show me why, and then I won't.
Yeah. Very cool. Well, that was great. We really hit on a lot of it. As always, just to wrap up, we thank our listeners for spending this time with us. This was a common theme that we had seen coming up over the last handful of months, and that's where we get a lot of the material for our podcast. So if you have any topics that you'd like us to discuss, please send that in to us. And Dan, why don't you show the book again? I know that you have a lot of these in the office here. So if you would like to get a copy of this book, please let us know. We've mailed this to a lot of clients where we've had conversations, just said, hey, it makes sense for you just to check this out. So, just wanted to offer that too. Anything else as we wrap up?
No, I think it comes back to planning as it relates to the book. I've gotten very positive feedback from clients that I've given it to. It's not that it's this giant thing like, oh, every single page I learned something, but it was small tidbits of things that may have related to them. So that's what I've found helpful. And you just don't, we can talk to clients about what those conversations are going to look like, but we're not involved in those all the time, those conversations. Sometimes we are, but not every single time. So I think if you're having conversations, you're communicating well, hopefully it's not frustrating and people aren't getting mad and things. It's probably not as bad as you might think it would be.
Yep. It's all part of it. And you also did a podcast with Cam that's on our YouTube page. So I'd encourage everybody to go check that out if that's something that they're interested in. So we'll link it in the description.
Exactly.
All right. Well, we'll go ahead and call that a wrap. Thank you as always for tuning in, and we'll talk to you next time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Live Greater View. If you like what you heard, please subscribe to our podcast on iTunes or Spotify and recommend our podcast to family and friends. To learn more about VLP Financial Advisors, please check out our website at vlpfa.com. Thanks again.
And now for our necessary disclosures. Securities and advisor services offered through Cetera Advisor Networks, LLC, member FINRA SIPC, a broker-dealer and registered investment advisor. All investing involves risk, including the possible loss of principal. There is no assurance that any investment strategy will be successful. The views stated in this podcast are not necessarily the opinion of Cetera Advisor Networks, LLC, and should not be construed directly or indirectly as an offer to buy or sell any securities mentioned. Due to the volatility with the markets mentioned, opinions are subject to change without notice. Information is based on sources believed to be reliable. However, their accuracy or completeness cannot be guaranteed. Past performance does not guarantee future results.